The line crackled to life, a thin, tenuous thread of sound against the immense, silent darkness of the Colorado Plains. At the Weld County Regional Communications Center, it registered as just another call in the blur of a late shift. The digital clock read 12:09 a.m. on Monday, August 19, 2013. The dispatcher, following the ingrained script, answered with a calm, professional cadence, 911. What is your emergency? What came back was not a voice, not a scream, not a coherent sentence. It was 7 seconds of ambiguous, haunting audio, a muffled rustle, the distinct, metallic crunch and clatter of a vehicle on a rough surface, perhaps gravel, and a faint, distant, almost spectral sound that could have been a word, a gasp, or merely the wind against the microphone. Then, silence, not the dead silence of a hung-up call, but an open-line silence, heavy with absence. The dispatcher repeated the question, her voice now sharpening with urgency against the void. Hello, hello, hello. Nothing, just the empty hiss of an open connection to nowhere. This was the insubstantial, terrifying preamble to the complete and utter vanishing of Kelsie Schelling, a 21-year-old pregnant woman who drove into that same vast night and disappeared, leaving behind a mystery woven from those 7 seconds, a web of lies, and a family's relentless, agonizing quest for answers. Kelsie Schelling was, by all accounts, a vibrant young woman with her future unfolding before her. She lived in Denver, worked at a medical clinic, and was bright, responsible, and deeply loved by her family. That future had recently taken an unexpected turn. She was pregnant. The father was her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Don Lucas, 22, who lived in her hometown of Pueblo, a roughly 2-hour drive south of Denver. The relationship was complicated, strained by distance and Don's unreliable behavior. But Kelsie, hopeful and committed to the life growing inside her, was trying to make it work. She saw a future. She had already had her first prenatal appointment and was eagerly sharing ultrasound pictures. The weekend before she vanished, Kelsie had driven to Pueblo to see Don. The visit was tense. He was distant, non-committal about the pregnancy, and financially unstable. Disheartened, Kelsie returned to Denver on Sunday, August 18. But a later conversation offered a glimmer of hope. Don told her he had come into some money, tax refund, and wanted to give her funds for the baby. He asked her to come back to Pueblo to get it. It was a late-night request, but for a young woman navigating the anxieties of an unplanned pregnancy with a reluctant partner, it was a gesture she desperately wanted to believe in. It was an olive branch against the cautious advice of her mother, Laura, who felt a deep, unnameable dread about the trip. Kelsie decided to go. She left her Denver apartment around 9:30 p.m., telling her roommate she'd be back the next day. She withdrew $100 from an ATM, filled her green 1998 Saturn sedan with gas, and pointed her car south on I-25, towards Pueblo and the man who held so much of her emotional and now physical future in his hands. The drive was familiar. She texted Don updates. At 10:48 p.m., she texted, almost to Pueblo. He replied, asking her to meet him at the parking lot of a local hospital, the St. Mary Corwin Medical Center. It was an odd meeting place, not his home or a public restaurant, but an isolated, sprawling parking lot, largely deserted late on a Sunday night. Surveillance cameras would later confirm her Saturn entering that lot at 10:52 p.m. She parked. What happened in that parking lot over the next hour and 17 minutes is the central, dark vortex of the entire case. Don Lucas's account of those minutes would become the sole narrative, a story that would shift and crack under scrutiny. According to Don, they met, talked in her car, and argued. He claimed he gave her $300 in cash. He said Kelsie was upset, feeling sick from the pregnancy, and wanted to go home to Denver. He stated that he left her car around midnight, walking to a friend's house nearby. He insisted she was alive, in her car, and planning to drive back to Denver when he departed. But the digital breadcrumbs and the stark, cryptic evidence of the 911 call tell a different, more sinister story. At 12:09 a.m., the 911 call originated from Kelsie's phone. The tower it pinged was not near the hospital, but several miles away, in a desolate, industrial area of South Pueblo near the airport, close to the intersection of Hartford Avenue and Baxter Road. This was a zone of warehouses, scrubland and dirt roads, not a route anyone would take back to the interstate to Denver. This location is critical. It meant that in the roughly 70 minutes between being seen on hospital security footage and the 911 call, Kelsie and her car had traveled to a remote part of the city. Was she alone? Was she following them? Was she fleeing from something? The 7 seconds of audio offer no clarity, only dread. The sound of the car on gravel or dirt is unmistakable. Then, the faint noise interpreted by some, including Kelsie's mother, upon hearing it, as a distressed help or hello, and by others, as an indecipherable exhalation. After those 7 seconds, the line remained open for another 17 minutes. The dispatcher could hear nothing but empty noise. During that time, the phone traveled again. It moved from the industrial area back towards the city's north side, near Don Lucas's grandmother's house, where he was living. The signal was lost around 12:27 a.m. in that vicinity. Kelsie Schelling, her car, and her phone were never seen or heard from again. The following morning, when Kelsie didn't return calls or texts, her family's worry escalated to full-blown panic. They contacted Pueblo police. From the very beginning, Don Lucas was the obvious focal point. He was the last known person to see her. His story was the only one available, and his behavior in the aftermath was suspicious. He initially claimed he hadn't seen Kelsie at all that night, a lie quickly disproven by the hospital security footage. He then adopted the story of the parking lot meeting, an argument. He offered to take a polygraph test, but, when the time came, refused on his lawyer's advice. He was evasive, changing details. The police investigation, however, seemed to move with a frustrating lethargy that would become a source of profound anguish and anger for the Schelling family. For days, they treated Kelsie as a missing adult who may have left of her own volition. Despite every piece of her character and circumstance screaming otherwise, she had left her purse, her insulin. She was a type 1 diabetic, her dog, her job, and her loving family. She was pregnant and excited about it. She was responsible. This was not a woman who would vanish. The family, led by her mother Laura and father Doug, launched their own parallel investigation. They plastered Pueblo with flyers, organized search parties combing the barren landscapes surrounding the city, and tirelessly badgered the police and media for action. They became amateur detectives, analyzing cell phone records, mapping pings, and interviewing anyone who might have a shred of information. Their efforts highlighted the gaps in the official response. Critical early evidence was potentially lost. The hospital parking lot was not immediately cordoned off and forensically processed. The search for her green Saturn, a conspicuous vehicle, seemed lackluster. Days turned into weeks. The 911 audio, though short, became a haunting totem. The Schelling family listened to it, tormenting themselves with its possible meanings. Was that crunch of gravel the sound of her car being forced off a remote road? Was that faint sound her last attempt to call for help? The ambiguity was a torture all its own. Without a crime scene, without a body, without the car, the police had no physical evidence to prove a homicide. They had a deeply suspicious person of interest and a timeline full of holes. The first major break, such as it was, came from Don Lucas himself. Though not voluntarily. Under increasing pressure, his story began to morph. He now claimed that, after he walked away from Kelsie at the hospital, he received a call from her later. Around 1:30 a.m., he said. She told him she was in Denver, having driven home. This was provably false. Her phone had gone dead in Pueblo hours earlier. There were no toll road records or witness sightings of her car on the route north. It was a transparent lie. Then, in early October, nearly 2 months after Kelsie vanished, Don was arrested not for murder, but for unauthorized use of her debit card. Surveillance video from an ATM in Pueblo on August 22 showed a man, identified as Don, attempting to use Kelsie's card. He was wearing a distinctive hoodie that belonged to Kelsie's brother. The PIN was incorrect, and the attempt failed, but it was a damning piece of evidence. It placed him in possession of her belongings after her disappearance and demonstrated a callous disregard. He was convicted of this felony in 2014 and sentenced to prison. But for the Schellings, it was a bitter consolation. It proved he was involved, but it wasn't justice for Kelsie. The investigation languished. The case grew cold under the weight of its own circumstantial nature. The Pueblo Police Department insisted they needed more tourists for homicide. The Schelling family, their grief calcifying into a steely resolve, refused to let the world forget. They harnessed the power of social media, kept Kelsie's face in the news, and petitioned for the case to be written. Their relentless advocacy eventually paid off. In 2016, under new leadership, the Pueblo Police Department's cold case unit took a fresh look. They re-interviewed witnesses, reanalyzed the cell phone data, and began to build a prosecutable case against Don Lucas, focusing on the circumstantial web that pointed to him as the sole responsible party. The theory prosecutors would eventually present was built on a foundation of lies, opportunity, and motive. The motive was clear. Don did not want the baby. He felt trapped, financially and socially. He had told friends he wasn't ready to be a father. The opportunity was absolute. He was the last person with her, in an isolated location, late at night. The lies were numerous and damning. He lied about not seeing her. He lied about her being alive when he left. He lied about her calling him from Denver. He was caught using her debit card. His cell phone data, though he claimed to have lost his phone that night, was suspiciously absent during the critical hours. The 911 call location proved Kelsie was not at the hospital when she made the call, but in a remote area Don was familiar with. But where was the body? Where was the car? These questions hung over the case like a pall. Without them, could a jury be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt? The prosecution's narrative suggested that Don killed Kelsie in her car, likely in that industrial area where the 911 call was made. The 7-second audio was the chaotic aftermath, perhaps a struggle. The car going off pavement, a final, muffled cry. He then, they posited, used her car to transport her body to a disposal site, driving it near his grandmother's house, where the phone last pinged. He then cleaned the car, disposed of it and Kelsie's body, and walked home. The car, a potential treasure trove of forensic evidence, had simply evaporated. Searches of reservoirs, landfills, and vast stretches of rural land yielded nothing. Kelsie and her Saturn had been swallowed by the Colorado landscape. In February 2017, nearly 3.5 years after Kelsie vanished, Don Lucas was finally arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The trial began in February 2020. It was a classic circumstantial case. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Jeff Chosner, wove together the timeline, the lies, the debit card theft, and the haunting 911 call. They presented evidence that Don had searched for terms like how to get rid of a dead body and pregnancy disappearances on his phone in the weeks before Kelsie's disappearance. The defense, led by public defender Michael Cook, attacked the lack of direct evidence. Nobody. Number murder weapon, no eyewitness, no confession. They argued the investigation was biased, focusing solely on Don from the start, and suggested Kelsie could have met with foul play from someone else. After her encounter with him, the centerpiece of the trial, the moment that hushed the courtroom, was the playing of the 911 audio. For the jury, and for the public following the case, it was their first time hearing those 7 seconds, the rustling, the gravel, the faint, ghostly sound. It was not conclusive proof of murder, but it was powerful evidence of a crisis, a moment of terror that occurred far from where Don claimed Kelsie was peacefully preparing to drive home. Kelsie's family sat through every minute, enduring the retelling of their nightmare. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than a day. On March 2, 2020, they found Don Lucas guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 12 years for theft of the debit card. For the Schelling family, it was a moment of profound, tear-streaked vindication. Justice, in a legal sense, had been served. The man they knew had ended their daughter's life was held accountable. But it was not closure. Closure is impossible when you have no grave to visit, no body to bury, no final understanding of those last, terrible moments. The 7 seconds of audio remain. They exist on the internet, in court records, in the memories of those who heard them. They are a digital ghost, a sonic snapshot of a life interrupted. They represent the terrifying fragility of a connection, call for help that connected to the world but conveyed no clear message. They are the absolute core of the mystery. Everything was normal. And then, in less time than it takes to tie a shoe, everything was wrong. And then, everything was gone. Kelsie Jean Schelling is still missing. Her green Saturn is still missing. The full truth of what happened between 10:52 p.m. and 12:09 a.m. on that August night is still missing. The conviction provided a legal resolution, but it did not fill the physical void. The plains and mountains of Colorado keep their secret. The case stands as a harrowing testament to the power of circumstantial evidence, the relentless love of a family, and the haunting power of a silence that speaks volumes, a silence that began with 7 seconds of confusing, terrifying sound, and has echoed for years in the hearts of those who loved the woman who made that call, the woman who vanished into the night after dialing 911,